like to call the August 23rd, 2021 meeting of the Rollsville Planning Board to order. Welcome, everybody, especially newcomers on the Planning Department staff. First item up for the evening is the Pledge of Allegiance. With that, I'd ask everybody to stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. And Commissioner Moss usually gives the invocation, but in his absence tonight, and do something a little different. Ask everybody bow your head for a moment or two of silence. Thank you, everybody. Next up is review and approval of the minutes from our last meeting on July 26th. The floor is open for any corrections or motions.
Mr. Chairman, here no corrections. I'll just go ahead and make a motion. We approve the minutes from last board meeting.
We have a motion for approval of the minutes with no corrections. Is there a second?
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify with an aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you. First truly meaty item of the evening is number 5, Wallbrook Setback Discussion. Meredith, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. Good evening. Great to see you all this evening. This presentation and the next presentation are two topics that we discussed at the last town board work session. So I'm looking forward to going over these topics with you and hearing what you all have to say about them. First one is a setback discussion inspired by a question that came from the Wahlbrook developer. And I'd like to give a little background information first to keep in mind as we have this discussion. The Main Street Vision Plan was adopted, I believe, in 2017 or 2018?
18.
8, am I right? Okay. A couple years ago. It has some great key principles in it, including stating that Main Street is Rollsville's gateway corridor. And it's really important the environment looks good and feels good and incorporates good urban design and placemaking. Also noted in the plan, we're developing catalyst sites to create sustainability. By having a catalyst site at each end of the corridor, it invites other good development in between those two sites. Also in the Main Street Vision Plan is this rendering that shows buildings pulled up to the street. And buildings pulled up to the street can be defined as, I like to use the word frontage to describe that, so keep that in mind also as we move forward. So with developments in the Main Street corridor, to meet those Main Street Vision Plan principles and that rendering example of pulling things up to the street, that creates that walkable environment and that kind of different feeling like you're in more of a downtown space. Setbacks may need to be reduced depending on the zoning district and what's going on in the corridor. And if a setback is reduced, or we can't, I mean, I'm sure the attorney will tell me we can't magically reduce setbacks. If an applicant or developer provides something extra, then there's an opportunity to provide a reduction if that is articulated in our land development ordinance. So this slide will come back up in just a moment. I would like to show you a few pictures that define some of these things. For example, if a setback was reduced, it could happen if buildings and community gathering space made up the majority or 2/3 of the frontage along the property line. There could be a wide sidewalk or multi-use trail and enhanced landscaping. Limited vehicular surface area, meaning you're not going to see all parking lot defining the frontage of a property. Something like public art could be integrated to add to that sense of place. So we'll look at some pictures to think about those things, then we'll come back to these in a moment. So what is frontage? Frontage is having something along the street that's not flat. It's a mass, like a building mass or an active space. This is a picture from Washington, North Carolina, but it was a good example of building frontage. Community gathering space could fill in gaps in frontage, and even though there's not a building mass there, this works because it's bringing activity to the space. So if you have a combination of buildings and active gathering space, if you're walking along Main Street and that's what you're looking or seeing to your side, it feels good. It feels like a place you want to walk through. This is an example of a multi-use trail that's 10 feet wide with some extra trees around it. So that's what that pedestrian experience could be like along the street. You can also see in the right of this image, a building right behind the landscaped area instead of a parking lot. Public art I threw in just as something for us to discuss. The town board reacted favorably to this suggestion as something that wouldn't be required, but as an option of meeting the criteria to have a reduced setback. So these two pieces of art are companion pieces in a development in Cary. One is a vehicular-oriented piece that you see when you're driving into the development, and the other is one you discover as you're walking through it. The pieces are by an artist named Jim Gallucci. I think they're pretty cool. So back to these potential things a developer would provide to get that setback reduction. So allow a setback reduction up to 65% within the Main Street corridor if buildings and community gathering space make up at least 2/3 of the frontage, and companion with that, vehicular surface area being limited to 1/3 of the property frontage. A 10-foot wide sidewalk or multi-use trail and enhanced landscaping would need to be provided. Enhanced landscaping doesn't mean one extra tree. We'd have to come up with some definition there. Maybe it's 25% more plant pieces of, or trees or shrubs than what is specified in the land development ordinance, because extra landscaping could technically be defined as one tree. That's not what we're going for. We're looking for something extra and special. And the last two bullet items could be optional. The community gathering space would not need to be incorporated to meet that frontage, but if community gathering space is incorporated, it's something that can really add to a sense of place, and also public art is something that can add to a sense of place. So an example, this is the overall bubble concept diagram for Wallbrook. I believe it's about 65 acres total. The piece in the middle on the south side of Main Street has been called the boat tract. And how much of this have you all seen before?
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot?
Just what's online,
Okay.
yeah.
Have you seen this rendering before?
I've not seen that rendering before.
Okay. This is it's a bubble diagram showing where the development will be. Like I said, the middle piece is being called the boat track just because it's kind of shaped like a boat. I don't know if that name will stick or not, but for now, we're calling it that. So with this example, you can see the buildings are pulled up to the street. There is limited vehicular surface area or parking lot area adjacent to the public right-of-way or property line. And this piece of property is in the general commercial zoning district. And right now, the setbacks for general commercial, the front is 20 feet, side 15, rear 35, corner 25. And that boat tract rendering you just saw illustrates some setbacks in the 10 to 15 foot range. So buildings A, B, and E on this rendering show setbacks that are less than what is defined in general commercial. So this development is located within that Main Street corridor. I'll go back for a moment. So this is an area defined in the Main Street Vision Plan where we want this to be walkable and feel a little different and feel a little more like an extension of downtown. So in order for an applicant in this type of situation to be able to reduce the setbacks, we're proposing that we draft an LDO text amendment that would say a setback reduction up to 65% would be allowed if the first four bullet items are provided and one of the other ones is included as well, one of the ones in italics. And when we presented this to the town board, they did give staff the go-ahead to draft an LDO text amendment, going into a little more detail than what is given here. And we will work on that, and we will also schedule a public hearing following that. And before we do that public hearing, we will come see you all with that language. But going back to this, I would love to get your feedback on what you think about this and if you have any other ideas.
I guess one thing on that boat track you're showing is the buildings, are they the ones that are facing Main Street, or which is actually South Main? Is that the front of the buildings, back of the building? What's that going to look like as you're driving down Main Street?
Sure, these are the type of buildings that will likely have more than one entrance, or at least the appearance of an entrance along Main Street. If you look at, let's look at Building D as an example. If, you can see there's the sidewalk type area is rendered around that. So I would expect to be able to enter that building from, if I were walking on Main Street on that sidewalk, or from the parking area.
I have a quick question too as well. Have we determined, or are we far along to know, are these single-story or two-story buildings? I believe they might be single-story, correct?
You know what, I am not sure. I know the square footage noted on this rendering was about 44,000 square feet.
Sure.
And
if it is single-story, how high the roof line goes up? I'm just curious about it. Not that it would impact my decision anyway, but I was just curious about the storage on it, if it's a single or two-story.
I'm not sure. James and I can look into that and bring that back to you
Yeah,
all.
where I was going with that is if it's going to buffer up to the Main Street, how high is it going to be towering over the area, the streets?
On the square footage, I don't imagine it would be
Much, okay.
towering over much. And I would think, based on the size of the buildings and how they're pulled up, it would be more of a pedestrian scale. But I can certainly find out for you.
I was just
what's in
curious.
mind, or we can keep that in mind.
Is this section planned for a typical sidewalk, or is it more of a paved path kind of thing?
More of a paved path,
Okay.
multi-use trail, 10 feet wide, something that feels more like a greenway.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking that kind of thing might really help lessen any adverse impact.
Meredith, is there any plans for parking along Main Street there?
On-street parking?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah,
But-
just asking. 'Cause I
Sure,
wasn't sure
sure.
if those were the plans that we had in mind for it.
And that's something I'll make a note of that as well. I'm still learning a lot on my fairly new
For
job.
the frontage that you have there, you're going to see an extension of the LAP project all the way across the frontage of this project. So extending the Main Street project that runs from Young will go all the way beyond the Wall Street project. So that's the complete street format that has been previously approved by DOT and by the town. Wahlbrook is incorporating that design, or those design elements, into their frontage along Main Street as well, even though it extends LAP beyond the grant that the town is getting. So that is another feature that comes into play in this particular example. However, for the board's consideration, and the reason I'm talking so much, I would advise, if you would, think about the use of this setback reduction in other places. So even if it makes great sense here, those conditions are such that any property owner, if they could incorporate those particular features into their frontage, would be able to use that setback reduction. That seems to accord with what our vision plan is, but that's really the reason it's coming back to you all. Not so much Wallbrook, as that will be its own site plan at some point if the developer progresses, but this will be a LDO amendment that will apply, in theory, to everyone. And so that's another thing on your scope. How far should this apply? Could you use setback reduction anywhere in town? Or should you only be able to use it along primary corridors? Or would it only apply on Main Street? We have to figure that out as well. And by we, I sort of mean the planning board and the staff. And bring that back to the board.
I did have a question. On the side where it says future road, has there been any plans for the same type, I guess, with setbacks and also I do see the greenery along it more. Is there a plan for developing sidewalks and all the other additional recommendations that are in the LDO as well?
And I don't know that off the top of my head, but I think you're making a great point. I think, if I'm understanding correctly, makes me question, you know, if this is going on, what everything else around it should be in harmony with it.
Yeah, and that's actually my question, because it kind of helps us understand how far setbacks, if it's going to be, will they plan in the future another building? Doesn't look like it from how this design is set up, but just thinking about if that's a future road, is that a Main Street type road? Is it going to be a more lanes? So those are my questions based on that, just because I saw the said future road.
Sure. I think with this development, Main Street is going to be the highlight. And with the other roads going through the development, they will be more like internal roads going through the development. But if this moves forward, as it moves forward, that is certainly something we can take a look at, and I'll make a note of it to make sure we can circle back on that.
I think the sidewalk on this one is on the bottom side of the future road, right? And in the LDO, didn't we put in sidewalks for both sides of the road?
And that's what I was
So that
thinking, it
might
was
be
already in
something
the
we need to
LDO.
talk about in the
Sure,
rendering.
sure.
They would have to include a sidewalk, but, so the other question on the Main Street side is that considered we didn't know if that's really the front of the building or the side of the building, but if it's the front, we're now looking at 20-foot setbacks, and they're looking to get somewhere in the 10 to 15-foot setbacks.
For buildings A, as this is shown, for buildings A, B, and E, they need,
A, B, and E.
they want to,
So that's where they
reduce
want to reduce it from 20 feet to 10 to
sure,
15, but then their
Yes.
sidewalks are gonna go from 6-foot sidewalks to minimum of
10.
10, so they're gonna lose 4 feet right there again, right? So,
The lap frontage along Main Street will have the walking path in the right-of-way, which was... Sorry, the lap grant will have the multi-use walking path in the right-of-way, which is being dedicated to the public on this particular site. So I believe another trigger for the request from this property owner was to avoid the double walkway effect. That is, the north side would have a sidewalk, the south side would have a multi-purpose walking bicycle path in the right-of-way. As the LDO is written, there would be that, and then right behind it on their property would also be a sidewalk. And that certainly is perhaps an unintended consequence that
Yeah,
a text amendment could avoid.
yes. I think the possible smaller setbacks, it probably makes sense for this kind of development. You know, like Mr. Neal said, on the major corridors, but if somebody were to develop something off of one of the historic side streets, those streets would, most of those streets would that would be a way too much, especially since, you know, some of them don't even necessarily have curb and gutter all the way, much less sidewalks currently. And that dedicated right-of-way tends to be a bit narrower. You know, I'm just thinking the neighborhood back over here behind the fire station, or even, you know, Brown Circle.
Very true.
I don't think we'd see anything getting that close to the street
Right.
in those situations, and could quickly turn into a safety issue too, just with traffic.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Now, I just say, I knew we had discussed the sidewalks on both sides of the street, but for new development anyway.
What do you need from us tonight? Mostly
Right.
ideas, concerns?
Yes, ideas, concerns. Also, I wanted to share this with you all, so you'll be ready for it when we bring the draft LDO text amendment for you to review. So it won't be a brand-new thing. You can be thinking about it, and then you might be able to help us more efficiently, since we're all familiar with it. And if you think of anything, you know, let us know. So far, this has been helpful.
Mayor Pro Tem Medley, is there anything you were hoping that we would think about or mention, or?
I would say that the questions that I had and the board had, I brought those up in the workshop. So I'm just taking what you're saying and putting in my notes to further discuss with the commissioners, one at a time, of course. But I know one of the questions that never came up was what side the building, or the entry to the building, was it from that street? I was thinking that it wasn't. I think I assumed that it was not, versus more in the inside of that area. So I thought that was a good question. And the question in regards to the stories, that was something that didn't come up. That's a good question as well.
For the board's benefit, the maximum height is 35 feet in that district.
See, I think the reason I've been asking about the buildings is we have a building in town, and what we've talked about numerous times, we don't need just a block facing, blank wall facing.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
We need to
no.
have some more aesthetics and better
I
view of
think
that.
that kind of came up in the meeting, though,
Yeah, isn't it,
about that.
well, in a case like this where the buildings have the appearance, you know, multiple entrances, the building might not have a true front. And just in a general situation like that, which side is the town going to treat as the front?
And I guess the address would be South Main Street, right? So you would
Yes.
think the front would be the South Main Street side.
Right.
But just depends on what they're looking at, and I guess we can take a look at that when the buildings come around to view at that time.
Well, definitely pass the feedback on to the developer. And what do you all think about reducing the setback if these first 4 bullet points on the slide are met?
I wanted to come back to that. So the
Sure.
first 4 I'm fine with. Why not have all 6?
Oh, I don't know. That's, I guess requiring public art is a big step. It's something, I'm not familiar with the
Nor am
history
I.
of public art here. I will admit I'm a fan of public art.
I love the aesthetics, yes.
I think it brings a lot of joy and sense of place to a development. I think if it's not something that the town has done before, I think starting with something like this is a great first step.
If I were to choose and pick one out of the, to join the other 4, it would be include private community gathering or green spaces that's publicly accessible, because we can always put art there in the future if I had to choose one over the other. Ideally, I'd like to see all 6. These are great ideas.
Okay, excellent, good feedback.
Board members, Section 6.8.2 contains the new non-residential building design standards under our form-based code, which was the lofty idealistic goal of the LDO, which provides a number of the limitations that you had mentioned prohibiting things like blank walls and that sort of thing along frontages that face public streets. So hopefully that section and your hard work there eliminates those unintended consequences automatically.
That did come up in the meeting, but it was, I just don't recall it being addressed, whether it's the front or not having those blank walls.
So, I guess my thought on this, when I read this agenda the other day, I thought, we spent a year plus, going through the LDO, and then here we are the first month or so out of the new approved LDO, if you call it that, and now we're already making changes, and
Right.
in years past, I think it was handled by special use permitting or something like that, so I guess now we're asking, instead of doing a special use, I don't know, can the town attorney answer what would be a better way to go with this, instead of changing what we've, I know there's always everyone's a standalone case-by-case situation, but.
Sure. So even though our discussion today has focused on Wallbrook, that is not the intent. The idea, however, was to return to the idea of that Main Street urban corridor idea. And this was raised by this property owner, but had been an item discussed during the LDO in terms of what those setbacks should be. Because of the LAP grant impact and the doubling down of walkways and the extra dedication of right-of-way, the Wahlbrook property owner raised this with the staff and the board to see what options might be available under the LDO to adjust their site, and believing that this could happen in the future, because that's what happens with a new law. You have to see how it works as applied. This might be something that we choose to do to improve the LDO. That should be the concept rather than helping this particular project. Other options considered and rejected would be, could the property owner of one of these sites apply for a variance? That is, the LDO is unjust. I am in a particular situation that is not of my own making, and I require equitable relief. Unfortunately, this property owner is just same as everybody else on Main Street, so that does not apply. And the extra dedication of right-of-way is certainly something that the property owner would be proposing to do, so that does not work either. We think about special use permits, which certainly came up all the time under the UDO, but special use permits impose additional conditions. They don't remove the basic standards of the LDO or the UDO. So if someone wanted to do something on a particular piece of property and the Board of Commissioners was concerned it would have a negative impact upon the neighbors, at the time of a special use permit, the board could impose additional setbacks deeper than what the UDO would have required. The board did not have the power to waive the requirements of the ordinance and just say, no, you don't have to do that. So this is a reduction of what is currently a single standard for every property in the CG district. So the question for the board and for the planning board is, should there be the ability to vary that setback requirement in a particular set of circumstances? And the planning staff has, I think, done a good job of kind of coming up with a list of the sort of features that other communities have used to address that. Should setbacks always be the same throughout a district, or should the setbacks be different in different circumstances? And that's really a question for the board, for this board and the other board.
I agree. I don't, it's gonna be hard to make one blanket, but, and that's what the LDO has been, is a blanket coverage of this is gonna be this no matter what, but we do have to have the variance to, are able to take a look at it, so. I think, so that's something you and your staff are gonna work on, is just, wording, so you just need a motion to move forward with changing the, current.
Or drafting up,
LDO zoning district right now and bring it back to us? Is that what you're looking to
Actually,
do?
Dave, you can confirm, I don't believe a motion is needed.
We don't need a motion?
I think this is more of a for your information
Okay.
type of presentation and.
Staff
get
needs
your
to take
feedback.
notes on what you say.
Yeah, so we're taking notes, and we'll incorporate your feedback, and when we come back to present the LDO text amendment to you, we will have some follow-up on your comments.
Okay.
So if that is okay, I will move on to the next one.
Yes. I believe that is, the next one is something we knew was going to come up with the new LDO.
Yes, perfect introduction, thank you.
Yes.
From what I have been told, this is an item that is in the parking lot of things that didn't get put into the LDO yet, and I actually appreciate it very much. As the planning director, a minor modification to a plan is something a planning director can approve, and right now, we do not have that defined in our land development ordinance. And Chapter 160D, I'm sure you've talked about that a little bit before. Chapter 160D land use law does clearly authorize municipalities to approve minor modifications if they are clearly defined in the land development ordinance. So examples of sort of typical minor modifications to site plans are things like reconfiguring a parking lot design, changing where plant materials are, slightly changing a road layout or configuration, or slightly shifting a sidewalk. And what slightly shifting a sidewalk means is moving it maybe 5 feet, possibly 10 feet, but not changing its location. So those are things with plans that we wouldn't want to bring back to the town board, let's say for a special use permit amendment, because they're fairly simple, and is that how the board would want to be spending their time? We'd also like to get your feedback on what you think about these minor modifications, and we do have an example to share with you. This is the Cobblestone Plan. This is hypothetical. This is just a good example because a lot of people are familiar with this. And the Cobblestone Plan, let's say the applicant has decided it's necessary to reconfigure some areas of the parking lot. For example, where you go into and out of the site, these parking spaces are likely too close to the intersection or where vehicles are going in and out. So there's an opportunity for a lot of conflict with cars coming in and out of the parking spaces and going in and out of the development here. So these parking spaces need to be redesigned or relocated or taken out in these spots to minimize that potential for vehicular conflict. It's also a little nerve-wracking to park right there where someone's coming in and out.
Right.
So actually, let me go back to this one for a minute. So with this being something, this is something that would easily be classified as a minor modification to a site plan. Let's say these 10 spaces on the right side are relocated to another spot in the development plan. You're not losing any design intent with that. It's a safety improvement, and it's fairly straightforward. Now, this circular drop-off that's shown in front of the community center building, let's say that's going to be taken out of the plan. That is something that the town board, when we presented to them, felt like that was something they would want to see. Changing the parking spaces at the entry points to the development was something they were comfortable with letting staff deal with that approval. But something like changing the flow, possibly changing how the building interacts with the vehicular circulation point, and what if the building changes a little, so that was something they wanted to see. So that would not be a minor modification. So that, what are your thoughts on these two scenarios? You don't have to agree with the town board, I'm not saying that, just letting you know what they thought.
Well, I mean, I agree. So basically that, these approvals that the planning board staff or director could make the changes without, and I agree with that. I think something like that should be, that would be fine. I think that
Okay.
makes good sense.
Okay,
Same.
Same.
That's a good observation. You're right. It just is going to create a lot of bottleneck, possibly fender benders,
Right.
frustration. Another thing that does come up from time to time is planting of trees and shrubs, blocking right of way or visibility as
triangles.
well.
Yeah.
And when you have something this confined, you could have that as an obstacle as well. So I'm on board with that.
Okay. Great. And what do you think, what do you all think about this one? Let's say the circular drop-off was removed and this was all parking places and the building shifted.
It needs to have character. And I think this adds a little bit of character to it. I don't logistically, I don't know if it serves a purpose as far as, obviously parking is always desirable. Clearly you cannot park around the circle. It's for dropping offs. It's temporary drop-offs, correct? Loading, unloading, my guess? Is that what their intentions are for that?
I think the design was made for seniors and young people to be
Okay.
dropped off for programs
Okay.
at the community center.
Yeah, I would like it to stay. Are we thinking about removing it? Is that
This
the plan? Or,
I am not sure what will happen with this plan. We just wanted to use this as an example to say, if this was changed or removed, do you think this is something that should come back to the town board for approval?
oh, okay.
So this is something, this is considered more of a,
Is this a major modification or a minor modification?
this is
Right.
something you're saying, should this go back to the town board, planning board to have reapproval
Right,
and
right.
redecide?
Like, if this was part of a rezoning sketch plan, and you all see rezoning
Yeah.
with
The other
their
one was
sketch
pretty
plans.
cut and dry. This is kind of changing the whole look of the plan. I
It is
guess.
changing the look of the plan, yeah.
Okay,
It's also kind of a traffic control in a way. It's,
I would say
yeah, it
this,
keeps traffic from backing up on the throughway there by, steering the parents and whoever picking up and dropping off out of the way. And that's a stretch that doesn't have parallel parking to use for that. So, I don't know,
I would think this would
I
need
don't
some more input from the group, I think, just to overlook
Yeah.
that. I think the first one, yeah, the planning
Pretty
director,
straightforward.
department handle, no problem, and this one,
yeah,
have a
Worth-
second set of eyes on it, so
Okay.
to speak.
so worth talking about.
Yeah, I think.
Can I ask,
Oh, go ahead. Go right ahead.
sure. Can I ask a question? Just trying to figure out how will you define major and minor? I do think this is a difference of changing the landscape, and maybe that's how we're defining what's a major change versus a minor change, which doesn't change the landscape or doesn't change. I'm just trying to figure out, how did you come up with major versus minor? Because that's what we're really trying to decide is, what are major decisions, what are minor
Yes.
decisions? And how far of major do we allow for administrative versus how far is minor? I think that's where I do believe, like what you have on here, the slightly alternate road and lot, those are minor. I mean, that's something that we, I don't believe should have to come before the board. But I'm looking at that middle of, that roundabout, and I don't hear in this, and I know it's a hypothetical, so I do know that, but I don't hear you saying, take away the circle, just design it so it still gives all, I'm trying to figure out the major minor, because saying slightly altering it, if they say, well, instead of it being a full circle, it's gonna be a half circle, is that major or is that minor? And so that's kind of hard for me to stand here and say, well, here, here's minor, here's major. I think that's where I'm,
yeah. If
Sure.
you're not eliminating, just reconfiguring,
yeah.
yeah.
So this is the challenge, is the statute was given to us with so much promise, right? So here's the framework. An ordinance can expressly set out minor modifications. If none are set out, they're all major modifications that need to go through the process.
Okay.
So this board and the staff have been asked by the Board of Commissioners to help us figure out what are those exceptions that could avoid the normal process that we've always used in the past. So it's about careful drafting is the right answer. That is, let's identify what we mean when we mean these are the exceptions. Boom, boom, boom. Varying the number of plants or plantings in 100 feet by no more than 5%, right? So now you've got an explicit check the box exception. Changing the species of plants proposed on the site plan, but still species that comply with the palette that the town has for vegetation. If they change from one plant to another, but it's still on the palette, should that come back to the Board of Commissioners?
No, I don't think so.
So those are those sort of reducing the setback by 10%, but still within the minimum. That is, they could have proposed it with this setback under the LDO, but when they initially submitted it, the building was farther back, and now they're scooching it forward by X%.
If it was still within the guidelines, that would be fine. That'd be a plan.
Well, if they showed it way far back, and now they push it all the way up to the line,
Yeah.
and so all the neighbors said, wow, look at that gigantic front yard. And then all of a sudden, whoop, it's right up at the 25-foot mark. Probably not minor. So often percentages are used because that's a math question that can be done.
I think I would agree more with defining and putting in percentages or things of that nature so that it does close it in for us and it's not a question, because it would really be up to the person who's reading it or dealing with it to become whether it's major or minor. And so I like defining it and bringing it in a little bit more so that we can make sure that it's major versus minor.
Okay. So it sounds like the percentages get a thumbs up.
Do you like the percentages, things that are, like you said, math that you can just,
Okay.
it's no gray to be, to try to define. Or it's always gonna be gray, but try to make it, and try to make sure that it has definition a little bit more so that it's more defining than, and I do believe reconfiguring parking design by what? Or only in this, and I don't want to get to the only in this scenarios or anything like, because that then, brings on other issues, but, something, I do like reconfiguring parking design, but for what? Or kind of
Yeah.
define that in just a little bit more so that it does help us say, well, in this, it meets every situation.
That could be something like the number of parking spaces doesn't change. The location of a certain percentage of parking changes, or parking spaces could be shifted.
Right, I
And-
agree with that.
We definitely need to be careful considering anything touching buffer requirements.
Okay, we can make a note of don't do anything there.
That's a fair point, Mr. Chairman. The staff would not be able to approve any modification that otherwise doesn't just meet the LDO standard. So the staff could not issue a minor variance. If the setback is 20 feet and the property owner says, how about 19? Well, if the required minimum was 20, the required minimum is 20.
It's 20.
So you can't modify beyond the minimum set by the LDO. And the North Carolina General Statute says you cannot vary the density of the development. So you can't add additional units beyond what was originally proposed and still say it's minor. So if you add a new lot to the subdivision because you determined you didn't need as much open space, that would not fit under something that staff could just approve as a check the box.
And I just have one question, just going back to the LDO. I remember us having this chart where it had a lot of like dots in it to say who can do what, who can do what, who can do what. Is this kind of the amendment, not amendment, but kind of the, if I can, and I'm just recalling because it was by design and it had all the little colors and dots on it, who could do what and who couldn't? Is that adding a whole nother, maybe a whole nother?
We're adding a new administrative decision. So we had the 3 kinds of decisions that local government makes. This is a new administrative type of decision, and those need to be objective.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that chart. I think it's great.
Me too. That's why I remembered it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next steps for this are for staff to draft the LDO text amendment defining the minor administrative modifications, and then bring that back to you all and schedule a public hearing with the town board. So this is another one that was for your information, to prepare you all for good discussion when we bring the draft text amendment back to you.
And I suspect that this could be like some of the tougher parts of the LDO that we went through, where we went through 2 or 3 months of going back and forth, tweaking ideas or knocking extras out.
I would think it's fair, my memory is that it would be fair to say that the stakeholders group did not forget these items.
Yeah.
The stakeholders group determined that these were items that needed their own look, and therefore were moved to the parking lot. That was a prior planning director's term.
I like it.
Yeah.
Sure. It fits into planning and development kind of language.
I just want to make sure I'm on the same page with you.
Yes.
So if something needs to be tweaked, and instead of coming to the, waiting for a town board meeting to bring it to our attention, admin would take care of that. But would there ever be a time where who's ever submitting those plans would realize that it needs to be tweaked, but they can't do it? Knowing that maybe you can do it and bring it to us? Does that make sense?
So they wouldn't,
Did that make any sense whatsoever?
I think I understand what you're saying.
So it's almost like a workaround for them to say, well, I know we can't do it this way, but I know if they're allowed to tweak it, they can do it, and then bring it to the board and say, well, this was better. We can make this better by doing it this way.
okay.
So to get them behind, it would still keep it moving on their, it would still keep that site, who's ever submitting that plan, it would still give them the option of getting this done, but it would be, their limitations would be stopped, but then you can bring it a little bit further. Does that, I know I'm not explaining that correctly.
I think I understand, and I hope that, that what you're saying supports that we need to do a good job defining the administrative minor modifications. Because if we do a good job defining those tweaks really shouldn't affect the design intent or the feeling of a development plan, if that makes sense.
One thought with this is that a minor modification should be one that if you were to look at the site plan today, and then the minor modification were to be made, and you were to look at that site plan tomorrow, you would not be able to tell the difference.
Okay, then that answers the question.
Okay, cool.
It would become one of those travel games where you'd be trying to find the difference in the picture between the left and the right. It should be small enough, and this will be a challenge for the Board of Commissioners, making sure that any of these minor modifications that are approved are such that the board members are confident that they would never want to see these as an agenda item
Right.
following sworn testimony. They just don't want it.
It just basically gives our admin staff a little bit of autonomy towards making just some common sense decisions without having to go through this process. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
That, like we talked about, if you're moving a sidewalk 2 feet to the right or 3 feet to the left, that's still in the same general area. Or the circle you talked, if we were gonna take it out and put in just parking spots, that's gonna change the whole looks of the, but now if they took the
You would
circle
notice,
from
yeah.
22 feet to 20 feet, you should be able to say, yeah, okay, no problem. Because it's still in the same spot, it's just a foot smaller in diameter, right?
Yeah, going back to what our town attorney was giving some examples about as far as just moving the setbacks. Yeah, is it that obvious? If it's not, well, I guess we do have to follow those guidelines, whatever guidelines we have set forth. 'cause
Correct.
We didn't
No,
put together
this-
LDO as Bible.
That's right.
But if it's changing the density of a certain area, because you brought it up earlier, and I kind of hooked into that as well, that's something that may require us, the board and the staffers involved.
That's right. So by statute, you cannot, or the property owner cannot vary the density.
Right.
And, or more importantly, a town does not have the authority to call density changes minor modifications. That we don't have the ability to write that ordinance. We may, as Board Member Pryor noted, we may need to revisit what those percentages need to be and have careful drafting. That is, maybe 10% is too much, but we have a history very recently of a modification to a site plan, and the request was to change phases 1, 2, and 3 of a residential subdivision into phases 1A, 1B, and 1C of a residential subdivision before 2 started. It was clear to me, sitting in this chair, that the Board of Commissioners wished that that had been handled by the staff. It made no difference to the community or to the future of that site, but it's a significant change to the, or it is a change, I don't know if it's significant, but it was a change that came back because the property owner in their original proposal had suggested that they would do it in 3 phases. Well, now it's sub-phases. So should that go back to the Board of Commissioners?
Okay.
Okay for me to go to item 7?
Please do.
My report is short this evening. I would like to introduce James Carter. He is our new Planner 1. This is the beginning of his 4th week, so he's been with us for 3 weeks, and we're pleased to have him on board. And also, we have a job ad out right now for a senior planner for the planning department, and that job opening closes, I believe, on Friday, September 3rd. So we hope to begin interviews soon after that. So our department is growing, so you will be having more of us here to work with you, and we look forward to doing so. And that is all I have this evening.
Sweet. And officially, James, welcome.
Welcome, Mr. Carter.
That's all. On to item number 8, Town Attorney's Report.
The Town Attorney's Report is a forecast that you should get used to being asked the sort of questions you've been asked at tonight's meeting. There are going to be a number of policy LDO amendment sort of questions coming up for your creative input. It was clear at our last workshop that the board would like to hear that feedback, and there are going to be needed amendments to the LDO in order to fill the gaps created by the parking lot items, and we're going to probably see a pattern of those coming forward for a period of time. And that's normal for the adoption of a new ordinance like that. That is all.
Good.
Item 9, other business. Mayor Pro Tem Medley, would you like the floor, or?
I spoke with the town attorney,
Okay.
and basically, what I had asked of you was that if anyone had any questions about what's been happening with the planning board, to just give me a call.
Okay. Okay.
But I will say one other thing, not necessarily about that, but I'm going to sit down with Meredith, and we're going to go over some things in regards to what secession looks like on any of our, particularly this board, since that's the one she is involved in, and just how we can fine tune things. And a couple of commissioners have said the same thing, that we just need to keep everybody in the know and make sure people know what the expectations are being on the board, and maybe not so much as even make them just come into your planning board meeting and not a town board meeting. maybe we need to really discuss how this really needs to move forward with all of our boards. So I think that would help a lot for those who are applying to be on the board, for those who are currently on the board, and just to, you know, have that liaison from the board at maybe a town board meeting or a workshop. But we'll discuss it and figure out what we can do.
Any other business? Not hearing any. The floor is open for possible motion for number 10, which would be adjournment.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
We have a motion for adjournment. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor of adjournment, please give me an aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Not hearing any. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, once again.